Thursday, and welcome to this week's edition of Offit Kurman's Remote Rundown. I'm Jim Ries, Director of Business Development at Offit Kurman, and each week I'm joined with labor and employment attorneys Russell Berger, Sarah Sawyer, and Veronica Yu for a conversation about the latest and most relevant employment issues related to COVID-19 and for advice for owners and employers on how to best deal with these issues. So there have been plenty of developments since last week. Sarah, why don't you start off and kick off the discussion?
Hey, yeah, sure. So now that we're starting to see companies look to reopen, really starting to pay attention to what they need to do, what they need to put in place, and how they need to be careful in doing so. Already starting to see some lawsuits being filed against employers that didn't close throughout the pandemic, so essential businesses, so different lawsuits related to employee safety, conditions, exposure to COVID-19, things of that nature. So now really a lot of businesses that are going to be able to start reopening or looking to their reopening strategy are really having to start to think about, well, how do I make sure I don't end up in that boat and make sure that I don't end up in future litigation or make sure that I'm complying with the law as I reopen. Namely, one big thing that employers are having to think about now, if they've been closed and are reopening, are the Families First Act and also new state and local regulations that have been put in place since this all started.
Yeah, I mean, another aspect of that, there's obviously liability with your own employees, but there's also liability from third parties like your customers and clients. So I know it's swirling around that there may be a push for federal legislation to protect businesses from these types of liability claims. Whether that's going to be feasible or not, because that's usually something that's delegated for the state courts to handle, we don't know. So we'll see what happens with that. But in the meantime, some tools that I've seen being used are third-party liability waivers, which basically say, if you're going to come onto our property or patronize our business, you're going to waive any liability for potentially being exposed to coronavirus. And so there's obviously no specific case law on this since this is all new. But it will be interesting to see how those hold up and whether they end up being against public policy and things like that.
You know, another interesting point that I think relates to what you were just saying, Veronica, is in the tort context, which is what these types of claims would probably fall under, there's a defense called assumption of risk. And basically what that defense means is that if you knowingly take on a risk and then that risk comes to fruition, it's not somebody else's fault. You knew that risk was out there and you took that risk. So I don't know what your thoughts on it are, Veronica, but it seems to me like they're not that you want to be in a lawsuit ever, but it seems like there might be some valid defenses to businesses, even if they found themselves in that situation.
Yeah, that was exactly my thought, because Maryland, Virginia, DC, and Alabama are some of the few states that still have contributory negligence as a standard. And that basically means if you're 1% negligent, you can't recover in a lawsuit. So that's definitely going to come into play. And a defense is also to negligence is, like Russell was talking about, assumption of the risk. And if you're a business and you put, house rules in place for your customers and they don't follow them, then they're setting themselves up for potential exposure in that sense. But another good point just for third-party liability is it's going to be very difficult to prove causation, which you have to do in order to prevail on a tort claim. But the incubation period for coronavirus is 2 to 14 days. So I think it's going to be very difficult for plaintiffs to establish that, coming to your business caused them to be exposed to coronavirus.
Right. Well, go ahead, Sarah.
I say that this also makes a good point about wanting to ensure safety, though, because it's if you have an outbreak at your facility or your location, that causation might become a little bit clearer if employees, especially in more rural areas, of our state or other states. So that's something to consider as well in that case. And then also the assumption of the risk, just making sure you actually do put those policies in place to hide behind them, or not hide behind them, but have coverage from them, I should say.
Yeah, Sarah, you said the same thing I was going to say anyway. So ditto. And that kind of leads me to some of the other risks too, and getting back to the risk with respect to employees. Besides, the risk of the exposure to the disease, there's all kinds of other risks related to, one area is discrimination. Are you treating people fairly? Are you treating people equally? Not treating people based on their protected classes, but based on, the merits or other criteria that aren't discriminatory or aren't protected by the law. So for example, when people call out, people ask to work remotely, people ask to have flexible schedules. Are you making those decisions based on criteria that are legitimate business reasons, or are you making those decisions kind of ad hoc in a way that could look discriminatory? So I think it's important for business owners to develop a plan for how they're going to answer these questions. And as long as the plan is non-discriminatory, then you can go ahead and you can apply it and, pretty much mitigate all that risk. But I think it's important to do some prep work and be prepared for that. In addition, one of my favorite topics as an employment lawyer is wage and hour matters. So that's minimum wage, overtime, getting all those rules right. And there's no shortage of minimum wage and overtime issues that this situation could create, given flexible schedules, trying to have exempt employees work reduced schedules and what that does to their pay. And just tracking time. When people are working remotely, it's obviously a lot harder to track the time. And I know, like for us, we wake up in the morning, we've got all day, and we work when we can. We deal with children when we can. We do other stuff throughout the day. We get some fresh air. And there's some good guidance from the DOL that gives employers a little bit more flexibility than the whistle workday rule. But you still have to be careful about how you schedule and how you track time, because otherwise you could end up with claims for unpaid hours.
Okay, well, this seems like a good time to pause. I'd like each of you to leave us with one key takeaway from today's discussion. Why don't we start with you, Veronica? One key takeaway from today's discussion.
Sure. So I think with other states starting to venture into reopening before Maryland, that we can look to them for guidance as to what to do and what not to do. I mean, I was just watching the news today, and Florida had to reclose their parks because people didn't adhere to wearing a face mask. So I think we can learn from that and realize that the policies that we've talked about week from week are very important, and that they have to be enforced to protect you and your employees and clients.
Russell?
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway I had from our session here today was, start planning. This is complicated. There's lots of different issues. Sarah, Veronica, and I talked about, 3 totally different types of exposure and risk to businesses as they reopen. And so I think it just really puts the onus on business owners and employers to really have thoughtful plans, to lay them out ahead of time. This is not something you can just kind of wing. You got to think your way through all these challenges, particularly with respect to the unique circumstances of your business, and sit down with those outside consultants that can be helpful and really iron out a good plan.
Sarah?
Yeah, I would agree with that. Definitely, make sure you start planning, but also be ready to pivot and change as things are developing, because obviously things are still changing, maybe not quite as frequently, but there's the guidance on what employers should be doing to keep people healthy and safe, and both their customers and their employees, is constantly changing, and it's in everyone's interest, both from a liability standpoint and from a keeping the economy running and keeping your business open standpoint, to make sure that you're keeping up to date with all the latest changes and the latest guidance, and preventing health issues, so that you can stay open, keep your employees present, healthy, and working, and keep your customers coming in the door.
Okay, so we will end on a lighter note, as we always like to do, and we're going to start with Sarah. And we're going to go around the horn. I want to know from each of you, how often and for how long have you been working out at home?
Oh gosh, on the spot. My biggest workout has been taking my 7-month-old puppy to on long walks. So, been taking him on probably hour and a half walks a day. Like that's been a big source of exercise for me. I'm usually an Orange Theory enthusiast, and usually spend an hour doing that every day. So I just converted that into puppy walking time. Sometimes we do little sprints. That kind of thing. So that's been my way to adjust, I guess.
How about you, Russell?
Yeah, it's been some degree of dog walking. And by the way, Sarah, maybe you could reach out to Orange Theory and see if they'll sponsor the remote rundown.
There you go.
But, yeah, it's been dog walking. It's been running around with a 5-year-old, and just not sitting. I sit at my desk a lot less. I'm up and down a lot more than when I was in the office. So that's about as healthy as I get. And I eat less junk food because I don't have any in my house.
Veronica, welcome back. We lost you for a minute. Did you hear the question?
No, but I'm assuming it has to do with relaxation or take away the
Well,
stress.
the question was, how often and for how long have you been working out at home? What are you doing to stay busy, stay in shape while you're not working?
So one of my very good friends who I lived with in law school lives in Colorado, and we are doing a Beachbody program together that consists of good old Sean T and Shalene Johnson. And my Peloton is like probably one of my favorite things to do during the day.
Excellent.
I
Okay,
think
that's
Veronica
right.
wins.
What'd you say, Russell?
I think Veronica wins.
Yeah, she does, for sure. That's a wrap up.
What about you, Jim?
For me, well, we have the Peloton app, which is free for about 90 days, and we've been doing different workouts, usually in the morning, and I go for bike rides or walks in the afternoon, weather permitting, and it looks like we might be buying a Peloton bike sometime in the very near future, for delivery in the very distant future.
I should revise my answer. I ordered my Peloton, and that's the most exercise I've done.
Good.
Right.
We've been talking about that for months.
Finally.
All right, well, it's been a good session today. Again, this has been Offit Kurman's remote rundown, and we'll see everybody next week. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jim.
Bye.